evening, everyone. It's time for Mrs. Blue Reads, and this afternoon we're starting a new book because we finished The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, and I thought it might be fun if we read Bear Grylls Adventures: The Blizzard Challenge. This book is published. It's by Bear Grylls, and the pictures are by Emma McCann, and published by Kane Miller. Okay, Bear Grylls, The Blizzard Challenge. It says, to the young adventurer reading this book for the first time, may your eyes always be wide open to adventure and your heart full of courage and determination to see your dreams through. Killer backpack, horrible tent. Ollie decided he wasn't going to enjoy camp when his backpack tried to kill him. He had gotten a ride with his friend Jack, who had been before. Jack's dad pulled into the parking lot, and Jack leaped out to go and report to one of the leaders. Ollie got out more slowly while Jack's dad popped the trunk open. Ollie grabbed his backpack and pulled. It didn't budge, but Ollie almost fell over. It's heavy, he protested. Well, there is a lot in it, Jack's dad replied. He lifted it out. I couldn't believe everything they told Jack to bring. Sleeping bag, climbing boots, running shoes, towels, umpteen changes of clothes. Didn't you notice when you packed? My dad did it, Ollie said. Oh, right. Jack's dad helped Ollie get the backpack onto his back. Ollie almost fell over again. It's a shame both your parents had to work this weekend. They do work hard, don't they? I suppose, Ollie muttered. They had said the camp was a treat to make up for it. He would have rather just stay at home alone, but apparently he wasn't old enough yet. Home had everything he needed: food, television, and no one else around. Jack came running back. We have to check in together. Then we'll find out who we're in a tent with. His big smile said he was so looking forward to this. Well, I'll see you in a couple days then. Jack got a hug from his dad. Ollie got a friendly pat on his shoulder. Enjoy yourselves. Ollie watched the car drive off. Then he turned and glumly followed Jack. The leader was a smiling woman with a clipboard. She took their names and then called another boy over. This is Omar, she said. We're putting everyone into threes, and you'll be sharing a tent together. Hi, Omar, Jack said happily. Pleased to meet you. I'm Jack, and this is my friend Ollie. Sure, Omar said. He smiled back, but he was already turning like he was impatient to get on. There he is. I found where we get the tents from, he called over his shoulder. Let's go. Wow, he's keen, isn't he? Jack commented as they set off after him. So that's two of them, Ollie thought to himself. They were given their tent and equipment in a huge bag that was so heavy all three had to carry it between them to a spot at the campsite. Then they had to put it up. It wasn't a modern pop-up tent where you threw it on the ground and it shot up like magic. Nothing so easy. Okay, Omar said, I've done this before. We have to fit these together so they stand up. Then we hang the canvas on the frame. So we just have to find the parts that go together. They started to rummage the pile of poles. Ollie soon found a couple that seemed to fit, and it looked like Omar had a couple that would screw into the ones he had. Ollie put his poles down so that Omar could use them when he was ready, and looked through the pile to see which other ones went together. Come on, Omar said impatiently after a moment. Ollie looked up. What? Pass them over. Omar pointed at the poles Ollie had put down. I've got a whole bunch that fit here. I just need those ones. I was about to pass them to you, Ollie said. Omar got up to fetch them, rolling his eyes and muttering under his breath. After that, they had put the frame over the ground sheet, then drag the canvas over the whole thing and tie it on. Finally, they had to hammer the pegs into the ground and attach guy ropes to them to make sure the tent didn't blow away in the wind. There's their hammer and the pegs. Okay, Omar said, I know how to do the ropes. Jack and Ollie looked at each other. You hammer in the pegs, then attach the ropes and tighten them, don't you? Jack asked. Omar shook his head. No, it's better than that. You make the ropes as tight as possible while you hammer the peg in. That way the peg makes them even tighter. So all three of us will have to do each rope, two of us to pull and one of us hammers. So Ollie put the first peg through a loop at the end of the first guy rope while Jack and Omar pulled. Ollie gave the peg a whack with a rubber mallet. The mallet bounced back and almost hit him in the eye. The peg didn't budge. "Whoa!" he shouted. "You okay?" Jack asked. Ollie tried again, but still the peg wouldn't go in. "The ground's too hard," he moaned. "I'll do it." Omar grabbed the mallet from Ollie before he could say anything. Ollie took Omar's place and pulled on the rope with Jack. Omar shifted the peg just a little to the left and hammered it in. No problem. Ollie turned an embarrassed red. "You were over a stone," Omar said scornfully. "Let's get the others done. Only 5 more to go." Omar kept the mallet to do the rest. When all the tents were up, one of the leaders walked into the middle of the campsite and blew a whistle. "Okay, everyone, now that we're all here, let's head to the meeting place." "Time to move," Omar exclaimed. He hurried straight off, gesturing at the other 2 to follow. Jack started to move, then realized Ollie was lagging behind. "Coming?" he asked. Did a little dance to show he really wanted to go. "Yeah," Ollie muttered, "coming." He followed them with his hands in his pockets, dragging his feet slowly. Chapter 2: Dens and Ducking Out. In a sandy clearing in the middle of the woods, a man was shouting instructions. "We're going to finish today with a barbecue, but first, this afternoon's challenge is to build a den with your tent mates. You have 3 hours. Use whatever you find in the woods, bring it back here, and we'll build our dens together." He paused. "First team to complete their den gets a prize. And you also get points for style, original thinking, how weatherproof it is. You get the idea." Ollie certainly got the idea, even though he couldn't believe his ears. He nudged Jack. "We're going to spend the afternoon making dens?" he asked, just in case he had misheard. "Yep," Jack replied. "Why are we making dens when we've got tents?" "Because it's fun," Jack said. Ollie rolled his eyes. This whole camp thing was just one pointless activity after another. Jack, Ollie, and Omar set off into the woods, and before long they came to a clearing where there were piles of logs, branches, and sticks, just perfect for den making. A lot of the other kids had the same idea. There was plenty of laughing and friendly bickering as they all tried to be the first ones to get the really good pieces of wood. Ollie was half-heartedly tugging at a branch when an ear-splitting scream made him jump so fast he thought he'd pull a muscle. A girl on the other side of the log pile was staring at something in front of her. "Could you scream a bit louder?" he asked sarcastically. She scowled and pointed. "There's a massive spider." Ollie peered over. The spider was about 1 inch across, which he didn't think was massive at all. "I just have a problem with creepy crawlies," she added apologetically. She looked miserable, and Ollie was sorry for being sarcastic. But he didn't get a chance to say anything else because just then, "Ollie, stop talking and get over here," Omar shouted impatiently. It took Ollie less than 20 seconds to get where Jack and Omar were, but Omar glared at him like he had held them up for hours. He showed Ollie the pieces of wood he and Jack had pulled together. "These are the right length and strength," he said. "We'll use these for the basic structure." Ollie groaned himself. It would be like putting the tent up all over again, but harder because these branches weren't designed to go together. "And then we can find smaller ones with lots of leaves," Jack agreed, "and use them to make a roof and walls to keep the rain and wind out." Excuse me. "Yes, but first we need to get these back to the meeting place," said Omar. "First team gets a prize, remember? Let's go." They each had 2 large branches to carry. Jack wrapped his arms around both and carried them across his chest. Omar struck one over each shoulder and kept them steady with his hands. They both set off. Ollie tried Jack's way first, but the wood felt too heavy, and the ends kept getting in the way. So he tried it Omar's way. His shoulders weren't used to that kind of weight, and the wood kept rolling off. Eventually, he tried to drag his pieces on the ground. That stopped his shoulders aching, but it actually turned out to be the hardest of all. The ends kept getting tangled in the undergrowth, and the wood was yanked out of his hands. "Come on, Ollie," Omar called from up ahead. "We'll run out of time." "So stop shouting and start building," Ollie thought with gritted teeth. Eventually, Ollie reluctantly decided that Jack's way was best, even though it made his arms ache. He caught up with the other 2 at the meeting place and dropped the logs. "Okay, now we need small stuff," Omar said, hurrying off again. "Another couple hours and we'll be done." As Jack and Omar headed back into the woods, Ollie's heart sank. A couple more hours of making this silly den? What was the point? He stopped suddenly as the thought struck him. That's right. What was the point? Answer: there wasn't one. Omar and Jack could obviously do it without him, so why didn't he just leave them to it? And so Ollie went slower and slower, and the others got farther and farther ahead of him. Then he swung off to the right and started to pick up his pace. The trees grew closer together. Where there weren't trees, there was tall bracken. Soon he couldn't see anyone else, just hear voices. A couple of times he heard a scream, so he guessed that the girl from the woodpile had seen another spider. Score, Ollie thought. Now he could spend the afternoon in a tent listening to music. Wouldn't be as good as being at home watching TV, but it was better than this. Are you lost? Said a girl's voice right behind him. You're on your own. Ollie almost jumped out of his skin. He hadn't heard her come up. I'm just going this way, he said, pointing through the woods. It was true. He was going to where the tents were. You don't look like you're enjoying camp, she said. It was like she could read his mind, and Ollie couldn't think of a good answer. I think you need this. She held something out, and Ollie took it. It was a compass. There was nothing special about it. It had a transparent plastic dial with a needle that always swung slowly to point north. Why did he need a compass? He could find his way on his own. But when he looked up, the girl was already walking off. So he slipped the compass into his pocket anyway and continued to head back to the tent. Chapter 3, Fifth Direction. This is awful, Ollie muttered. He lay on top of his sleeping bag and stared at the canvas ceiling of the tent. He was finally doing what he wanted. But when he tried to focus on his book, the words just seemed to swim around in front of his eyes. Couldn't make himself care about the story, and the music on his iPad sounded dull and flat. He felt guilty and even more bored than before. Ollie sighed. Okay, this had been a bad idea. If he had to be bored, then he might as well do it with the others, even Omar. He got up and headed back to the woods. It took Ollie a while to find Jack and Omar among all the other kids racing around, still gathering den material. Eventually, he saw Jack in the distance through the trees, carrying a heap of fern leaves. Looked like he could use a hand. Ollie set off after him. Omar and Jack were building their tent at the edge of the meeting place. As Ollie made his way through the trees, he got quite close to them without realizing. Hearing their voices made him smile. He had sort of missed them. Jack was his friend, and Omar was okay. Omar wasn't his friend. Not exactly. But he wasn't nasty. Just a bit impatient. Then he heard what the boys were saying. I don't know why you bother with that loser Ollie, Omar said to Jack. Hey, Ollie's not, Jack began. Well, he's not here, is he? Omar snapped. We can do it without him. Here, help me tie this. Ollie stood where he was, stunned. So, he thought, now I know what Omar thinks of me. And what was he supposed to do now? Pretend he hadn't heard? He turned around and went back to the tent. Ollie lay on his sleeping bag again. This time he was both bored and upset. And now that he came to think about it, he was also hungry. It was time for the barbecue, so everyone would be snacking on delicious burgers and sausages. But Ollie didn't want to face Omar, so he just lay there alone for what felt like forever. Eventually, it started to get dark, and Ollie heard voices getting nearer. The barbecue was over, and it was time for bed. Jack and Omar pushed their way through the tent flap. Omar's lip curled slightly when he saw Ollie, like he thought Ollie smelled. Jack just looked sad. We built a really good den, Jack said after a moment. You'd have liked it. Did you win the prize? Ollie asked. No, Omar told him abruptly, because there were only 2 of us. We needed 3 to get everything done in time. After that, no one said anything much. The boys got ready for bed and slid into their sleeping bags. Outside, the camp was going quiet. Soon, Ollie could tell from the sound of Jack and Omar's breathing that they were asleep. He could still hear voices outside from other tents. But one by one, they went silent. He lay in his sleeping bag, feeling wide awake. He could still hear Omar's words in his head. Somehow, Ollie had to get through the rest of the camp knowing what Omar really thought about him. And Jack was obviously disappointed with him, too. At least if he could sleep, Ollie thought, it would be over quicker. He often fell asleep listening to music, so he felt in the dark for his iPod. The screen lit up just in time for him to see, connect to power source. Then it went blank. Ollie groaned and let his hand flop back with the dead iPad. Something hard and plastic knocked against his knuckles. What was that? He held it up in front of his face so that he could see it in the dim light. Oh, yeah, the compass. Suddenly, the compass dial lit up as if a light had come on behind it. That was weird because there was nowhere for a battery to go. He could make out the needle and the four illuminated markings for north, south, east, and west. They were just bright enough for him to see without being able to read. He turned it idly in his hands, watching the needle stay on north. But then the needle seemed to be turning on its own. Ollie watched it as it slowly spun through north, east, south, west, and stopped on a fifth marking. Huh? Ollie said out loud. Couldn't hide his surprise. How were there suddenly 5 directions? Jack and Omar stirred, but didn't wake up. Ollie looked around suspiciously, thinking, looking for an explanation. Then he looked back at the compass. Couldn't see in the dim light what the 5th direction was called, but he could see that the needle was pointing out of the tent. Just as he looked over at the flap, a gust of cold wind blew through him, and he gasped. It was so cold, it was like someone had slid a knife made of ice under his skin, absolutely freezing. Ollie clambered over to zip the flap completely closed. Suddenly, bright sunshine shone into the tent. Ollie blinked hard, paused, then slowly crawled out and stood up. He stared in astonishment at what he saw. Should have been in the middle of the campsite, surrounded by tents, and it should have been nighttime. In fact, it was daylight, and he was standing on rocky ground covered with bright white snow, surrounded by giant mountains. What? It was freezing, even though the sun was shining so brightly in the blue sky that Ollie had to screw his eyes to slits. He wrapped his arms around himself. He could feel the cold eating to his bones. Hey! A man's voice shouted in his ear. Quick, or you'll freeze to death. Chapter 4, next week. Many Ways to Die. Tune in next Wednesday to hear more of Bear Grylls Adventures, the Blizzard Challenge. Hope you enjoyed it. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Bye.